These are the most disturbing crimes that happen within the Yu-Gi-Oh community, and as this video goes on, the cases only get worse. The Yu-Gi-Oh trading card community is one of the largest collector scenes in the world, built around buying, selling, and chasing rare cards. But one incident would show just how easy it was to trick even the most dedicated collectors. It was mid-February 2018 when a listing appeared on Yahoo Auctions Japan, the country's largest online auction platform, for something most Yu-Gi-Oh collectors would never see in their lifetime. This card was known as Lorelei the Symphonic Arsenal, a prize card that was given to runner-ups at the 2008 Yu-Gi-Oh World Championship. Because it was handed out at that event and was never commercially sold in any Yu-Gi-Oh card pack, there were only 6 real copies in the entire world, but somehow one had just been put up for sale. The listing priced the card at 400,000 yen, or about $3,570. For a card this rare, the price didn't seem unusual at all, and it wasn't long before someone decided to buy it. The buyer was a woman we'll call Yumi, who was in her early 20s and was living in Kyoto, Japan. Like many other collectors, Yumi regularly browsed auction sites hoping to find rare cards. So when the listing for Lorelei the Symphonic Arsenal appeared, she paid in full, thinking that she just secured one of the rarest cards in existence. However, that joy only lasted until the card arrived. As she examined the card right after receiving it, one detail stood out, and that was that the background of the illustration looked much more colorful than it should have been, and she'd seen enough reference photos to know exactly what that meant. The card was a fake. But instead of confronting the seller, Yumi went straight to the police with it. She reported the purchase to the Kyoto Prefectural Police and told them that she just paid 400,000 yen for what she believed was a fake. Now, officers soon began investigating her complaint and looked into the auction listing that led to the sale, comparing the card to images of authentic copies of Lorelei. And at that point, there was still a doubt left that there was something strange going on, because the card wasn't just slightly different or poorly printed, it was a counterfeit. And as a result, police then turned their focus to the seller, and according to the information attached to that listing, it had been posted by Shunki Iwasaki, a 29-year-old man living in Setagaya Ward, Tokyo. On October 23, 2018, about 8 months after the listing first appeared, officers then arrested Shunki on suspicion of illegally copying a company's product. The fake card still carried the name and logo of Konami, the business that owned the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, which meant that he just landed himself in big trouble with a large corporation. Now, during questioning, Shunki admitted that he'd sold the card and acknowledged that it was fake, but chose to sell it anyway to make some money. However, he insisted that he was not the person who created it. Now, because of that claim, police were left with one more mystery to solve. Where did the fake actually come from? Unfortunately, based on the information that was made public, the identity of the person behind the fake card was never revealed. However, while Shunki confessed to knowingly selling the fake card, there's no record showing whether he was convicted or punished for his crimes. And while this case cost one collector $3,570, the next one was even more disturbing, for a completely different reason. Because this time, the person at the center of the controversy wasn't some random seller online. He was one of the most respected players in the entire game.
It looks like it is a bad time to be a cheater in the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game, because apparently it doesn't matter what your accomplishments are or who you might be, you can get absolutely wrecked.
Ryosuke Tsujimura, better known in the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh scene by his nickname Hitsuji, was a Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh player in his early 20s, who became internationally famous after winning the 2017 World Championship. But about a year later, footage from one of his matches began circulating online, and what viewers noticed would become a scandal that would completely divide the Yu-Gi-Oh community. Before that moment, Ryosuke had already spent years building a reputation inside Japan's professional Yu-Gi-Oh playing circuit. Like many other players in the community, he competed under a nickname rather than his real name. And over time, Hitsuji, which means sheep in Japanese, became recognized among top-tier players for his ability to play some of the most difficult decks in the game. Throughout the mid-2010s, he regularly competed in regional tournaments, shop championships, and national qualifiers across the country. And in August 2017, he would go on to win the Yu-Gi-Oh World Championship, after qualifying through the Japan National Championship in Tokyo the month before. Now, when Ryosuke stepped onto the stage at that World Championship, he came equipped with a strategy that was already dominating the competitive scene, using a deck known as Dinosaur Yang Zing. This strategy first appeared in April of 2017, when new cards were released in booster packs that allowed players to create stronger decks. To explain it simply, Dino Yang Zing combined 3 groups of cards. These were dinosaur monsters that acted as the main attackers, Yang Zing cards that were support cards, and the powerful boss monsters known as True Kings. When these cards worked together correctly, they could shut down almost everything your opponent tried to do. Think of it like showing up to a fistfight and your opponent just brought a tank. You could technically still win, but your odds wouldn't be great. Now, because of how dominant this deck became, rule makers eventually stepped in, and in October 2017, the deck was actually banned. No one could ever use its strategy again, not even Ryosuke. Now, following the ban, he had to build a new deck from scratch, one that could replace the strategy that had carried him to the top. And more than a year later, after his championship win, on November 23, 2018, he participated in the largest independent Yu-Gi-Oh tournament in Japan, the Hadi Grand Championship. As the reigning world champion, the crowd expected Ryosuke to dominate, and after being matched up with a player named Uchi, Ryosuke barely hesitated between plays and moved through the match seamlessly. However, it wasn't until a Twitter user posted the footage of the match that people began to understand why it had looked so easy. Ex-user Pepe Adon ran an account that mainly focused on reviewing match footage, and after coming across the recorded Hitsuji vs Uchi game, Pepe Adon began carefully watching the match frame by frame. And the more the footage was reviewed, the more Ryosuke's plays began to look suspicious. In the video, Ryosuke could be seen making unusual deck movements while shuffling and cutting. At certain moments, he appeared to manipulate the deck in a way that allowed him to track the specific location of certain cards. Now, it's unknown whether or not Uchi realized what was happening during the match itself, but once the footage was examined online, many players in the community concluded that he'd been cheating. On November 26, 2018, 3 days after the match, Pepe Adon posted the footage publicly, and within hours, the video began spreading everywhere, and discussions erupted across forums and social media, all debating whether the actions were intentional cheating or simply careless play. Now, the pressure eventually reached Ryosuke himself, and he responded to the accusations by posting a statement online. The same day, the video went viral, saying, "Although it's true that the video shows me not doing a deck cut, I didn't deliberately change the top card on the deck." Now, soon afterwards, the tournament organizers got involved and started their own investigation into the match. And the very next day, on November 27, 2018, the Hadi Grand Championship organizers announced their decision on their blog. Ryosuke was indefinitely banned from the event and all tournaments associated with it. For a player who had once stood at the very top with the dominating deck of the time, the punishment was devastating. The following day, November 28th, he posted on Twitter stating, "Regardless of the results of the investigation into my illegal play, I apologize for causing inconvenience to the Hadi Championship organizers and to my opponent Uchi." In the end, the community got a ban and an apology, but never an explanation. Ryosuke had already reached the top of the game, and no one ever found out why he felt he needed to cheat to stay there. In this next case, however, there was no need for slow motion replay, because everyone could see exactly what happened.
Reluctantly admitted to be using less than 45 minutes before his little outburst. Because of course, the perfect time to do is right between rounds of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Locals.
It was the evening of July 9th, 2024, in Marshfield, Missouri, when a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament was in motion. Inside a local card shop, players carefully shuffled decks and slid sleeves against each other as competitors prepared for the next draw. Some players were calculating their next move, while others watched nearby, waiting for their turn. But before the night was over, things would escalate at one of those tables, in a way that no one in the room was expecting. One of the players sitting in that room that night was 26-year-old Haven Burkhardt from nearby Springfield, and he was playing against Jordan, who'd come to the store to play for fun like everyone else. Haven was having a great time, until he found himself in a losing position, and instead of quickly playing out his turns, he started moving through the game extremely slowly, as the clock continued counting down. Now, Jordan eventually noticed what was happening. Haven was doing this to stall, and he wasn't having it. According to a witness, Jordan leaned over and said, "Hey, could you please play faster, since it is almost time in the round?" But unfortunately, Jordan's comment changed the mood at the table. Haven said, "Nah, you can shut up though." Jordan responded, "Well, you are slow playing." And within seconds, Haven was already making threats towards Jordan. "Well, how about I punch your teeth in instead?" Now, as nearby players started to notice, a few tried stepping in to calm the situation down. Jordan, now feeling threatened, called 911, and other players began calling out for the head judge to come over. And while all of this unfolded, Haven got up and walked over to the front counter where Victoria, the staff member running the register, was standing. He turned in the playmat he borrowed and demanded, "Give me my prize pack now." Victoria, unaware of what just happened at the table, calmly replied, "Well, I'm about to do prizes here in a moment." By then, Jason, the store owner, had already been informed and came over to figure out what happened. He told Haven, "Listen, you're hereby banned from the store, our second store location, and I never want to see you step foot in here again." Now, Haven demanded his prize pack anyway, but Jason told him that he wasn't getting it, and that was when Haven put his hands on Jason in an attempt to push him aside and reach for the prize sitting nearby, which he would realize was a huge mistake, because before owning the card shop, Jason had served in the military. And the moment Haven put his hands on him, Jason grabbed him and warned, "You need to leave now, before this gets worse." But Haven didn't stop, and the two struggled until Jason finally had enough, and picked him up off the ground and slammed him onto the floor. Haven looked up and said, "Oh, you just assaulted me," and then stood up and raised his fist like he was about to swing. He never got the chance though, because at that exact moment, 3 police officers walked through the door, and in an instant he was tackled to the floor and taken out in handcuffs. Now as they escorted him out the store and toward their vehicle, it seemed like the situation was finally over. But then something caught their attention. Nearby they located Haven's car, and inside was another man who'd apparently been there the entire time. And curious, the deputies approached to figure out who this person was and why he was waiting there during the incident. Now we'll call the man in the car Peter, since his identity was never made public. But when officers ran his information through their system, they discovered that he wasn't just a bystander. He had active warrants out of Greene County for failing to appear in court on a charge related to tampering with a motor vehicle. And because of this, Peter was placed under arrest as well. Now to make this even worse, after a thorough search of Haven's car, they found drug equipment inside. And that's when Haven admitted that he'd used heroin 30 to 45 minutes earlier and thought he might be overdosing. So emergency medical services were called as well to evaluate him before he could be taken in. Now after searching the car, deputies also searched Haven himself, and inside his wallet they found a small bag of cocaine that weighed around 0.14 ounces or 4 grams. And so by the end of the night, he was facing multiple criminal charges including assault and drug possession. He was then booked into Webster County Jail and held on a $50,000 bond. Now at the time the incident was reported, Haven was scheduled to appear in court on July 23rd, but little information had been publicly released about what happened afterward. The chaos in this story started and ended in one night in a card shop with people who could see exactly what was going on. The next case, however, played out entirely online and began with a photo of something that people thought never existed.
And as the story made its way to Reddit, Facebook, and eventually YouTube, the public narrative of this car took life on its own.
On December 22nd, 2020, at exactly 9:35 in the morning, a user named Ween messaged in a Discord server called r/u, a place where collectors bought and sold cards. He asked a simple question: "Can I get a price check on these parallel rares from MF03? At first, nothing about the message stood out. That changed the moment though he shared a photo. The cards looked different from anything most players were used to see. They had a metallic sheen that reflected light in a way that looked unusual. MF03 was the third set of promotional cards produced through a partnership between Konami, the Japanese company behind the game, and Mattel, one of the biggest toy manufacturers in the world. In the early 2000s, the two companies worked together to produce Mattel GX action figures, a line of Yu-Gi-Oh toys. Each came with a promotional card packed inside the box. And the image Ween sent showed 6 of these cards, including Elemental Hero Avian, Bustenatrix, Clayman, Sparkman, Bubbleman, and Cyberdragon. The toy line had been poorly distributed, and some products were quietly cancelled before they ever reached stores. Now for years, cards like these had existed more as rumors than confirmed pieces of the game's history, and everything the community knew about them came from scattered forum posts and old box photos. No one had ever actually seen them, and yet here they were. Ween explained that he'd been given the cards as a gift and placed them in a childhood binder, stating that it was something that had been sitting untouched since he was a child. Now people immediately questioned whether the cards were even real. One even pointed out small inconsistencies like the numbering on Cyberdragon that had EN009 instead of EN010. Others focused on the fact that some of these cards had never been publicly documented before. However, at the time, other people were also excited, because if the cards were actually real, this was not just a rare find, it was a lost piece of the game's history, the kind collectors had been chasing for years. Now on January 6, 2021, almost a month after Ween sent the photos, he submitted several of the cards to PSA, which stands for Professional Sports Authenticator. They examined cards and scored them on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 meant the card was in perfect condition and 1 if it was heavily damaged. Now when the results came back, Clayman received a 3, meaning it was in rough shape. Avian scored an 8, which put it in a pretty good condition, and Cyberdragon received a 6, as it had some visual flaws but was still in decent shape.
And it passed the smell test. There weren't any glaring issues, the parallel foiling, the card text, there was nothing off with the card. If it was a fake, it was one of the most convincing anyone had ever seen.
Now soon after, Ween started planning an auction, and to handle the process, he worked with Dan Parker, who was the owner of YGO Organization and Yugipedia, two major community-driven platforms dedicated to the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game. Together, they created a dedicated Discord server designed specifically for selling these cards, and it was complete with channels for bids, questions, and buyer verification. Ween posted on Facebook to advertise the cards, and that's how people found out his real name, Kevin Lee. And to join the auction, you would just need to prove that you had the money to purchase it. Dan posted the details on TCG Player, an online marketplace for trading cards, stating, "Applications will be temporarily granted access to a vetting user group, giving them access to a channel only them and the auction staff can see, where they can prove who they are, where they are, and the funds with which they're making their bids." Now the auction officially began on January 15, 2021. 9 days after the cards were sent for grading, at 4:15 p.m. Bidding on the first card, Clayman, reached the thousands, and collectors were competing for the item that many believed might never appear again.
$500. The bids kept climbing. 1,000, 1,200, 1,300, 1,600, 2,100, all the way up to $2,500. And then the deleted user made the biggest jump yet with a $3,000 bid. Freedom07 fired back immediately with $4,000. The bidding war showed no signs of slowing down. $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. The numbers kept soaring until Freedom07 pushed the bid all the way up to the magic $10,000 mark. This number seemed to silence the competition, washing out the lesser bids as the clock ticked toward the 30-minute checkpoint. But with just 1 minute to go, 29 minutes into the countdown, that big goldfish swooped in with a last-minute snipe, $10,500.
Eventually, it sold for $10,500 to a user named That Big Goldfish, while Avian followed with an intense exchange of back and forth bids that reached $11,000 from a user named Nubs0948.
From 2,000, 3,000 to 5,000 this time, the bids were more spread out apart. With a bid of $8.5k, Man in the Shad decided to bow out, leaving 3 contenders. The bidding moved on, $9,000, $9,100, $9,500, and then Nubs pushed it to the 10k mark. That big goldfish tried the same last-minute move as before, dropping a $10,500 bid with just 2 minutes to spare. But this time, Nubs was ready. With a quick counter, they bumped it up to $1,100. And just like that, the second card was sold.
Out of all the cards in the set, Cyber Dragon was the one that had never been publicly seen or documented before, and bidding climbed steadily and reached $30,000 when a bidder named Rafa376 placed his offer. But then a bid of $30,500, only $500 above Rafa's offer, would be added by a buyer labeled as deleted user. Now 30 minutes passed with nothing to counter, and the auction closed. Cyber Dragon was sold. Now as the excitement settled, people began revisiting the auction itself, going through screenshots, timestamps, and messages that were sent during the bidding, because they were already skeptical about whether the cards were even real. And the more they investigated, the more the auction itself started to feel off. The deleted user who placed a winning bid of $30,500 on Cyber Dragon started to get attention from the community. What made it suspicious was how the verification process worked. To place a bid, every participant had to either provide ID and proof of funds, or be personally vouched by Kevin or Dan. That gave Kevin the ability to let anyone he personally knew into the action, without requiring them to prove that they had the money. Now before the winning bidder's account was deleted, his name was Blue Oreo, and he wasn't actually there to genuinely buy the card. After the auction closed, Kevin went to Dan and admitted something that changed everything. He told Dan that he and Blue Oreo had arranged it from the start. Blue Oreo would enter the auction, drive the price up by bidding against real buyers, and if he ended up winning, they would resell the card together and split whatever profit came from it 50-50, with the original $30,500 going back to Kevin first. But the plan actually fell apart before it even started. Blue Oreo never actually had the $30,500 to begin with. The whole thing depended on the resale working out, and when that didn't, he admitted to Kevin that he had nothing to give him, and that was what forced Kevin to go to Dan and come clean in the first place. Now aware of the scheme, Dan shared this information with a small group of vintage collectors in a private group chat, but it didn't stay private for long. Someone in the group took the information straight to the YGO Drama Center Facebook group, and the entire situation was out in the open. On May 7th, 2021, 4 months after the auction, the same Cyber Dragon would be listed on eBay with a starting price of $10,000, and despite the fraud being publicly exposed, the card still attracted bids, but the highest was at $23,600, which was already much lower than the $30,500 from the original Discord auction. Even then, the situation didn't resolve, as that buyer never paid either, and just when people thought that this was the last time the card would be seen, they would be proven wrong in 2024, 3 years later, when it was listed on an online marketplace for collectibles called Rare Candy, with an asking price of $150,000. Now around that time, Dan had been receiving messages from employees at PSA, BGS, and CGC, 3 of the biggest card grading companies in the world, all asking about the card. One of those employees from CGC, who we will call David, ended up flying out to see Kevin personally to inspect it, and after confirming it was real, David actually bought the card, with the final sale price being kept private. Now whether Kevin has ever faced any real consequences for what he did was never made public. His scheme had played out behind the screens and usernames, and the community never got a proper resolution. The next case was something far more personal though, and it happened to women who were just trying to play the game.
You know, I can go into a shop and it gets quiet and everyone stares at me, or I can go in the shop and then I get hit on.
It is rare to see women participating in trading card games, even though in the wider gaming world, women make up nearly half of all players. But in trading card games like Yu-Gi-Oh!, the numbers are much lower. At big tournaments, women often make up only a small group, sometimes only about 5% or even less. This can mean walking into a room of 100 players and seeing only a handful of women. And for a long time, most people didn't question why that was, until people started sharing what was really going on behind the scenes. And by 2016, enough of these experiences had been shared privately that someone within the community decided to bring them into the public eye. A YouTube channel known as House of Champs released a video titled "Why More Women Don't Play Yu-Gi-Oh! Harassment in the Online Community", showcasing a compilation of screenshots, messages, and personal accounts from 7 women who described their experiences within the game's player base. One of them was Saori Desu, who made a public trade post in the Zodiac Facebook group, where players would discuss and trade Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. At first it looked like a normal post, until a user commented, "Only if it comes with your nudes." And then almost immediately the same user followed it up with another message, "Request ban," asking that Saori be banned. Even though it was only one person, it showed how fast things could cross the line, even in a space where everyone was supposed to be there for the same reason. And while Saori's experience came from a single public comment, for others these interactions didn't stay in one place. They moved into private messages. Ellen Thomas was a playmat designer who shared her work and collection online. At one point, she received a message from someone she wasn't even connected with saying, "Hey, can I see your playmat collection?" Now she didn't respond for days. Then nearly 2 weeks later, another message from the same person. "Answer." There was no other message in between these 2 messages, yet the tone had changed completely. And in other cases, messages like these come across as something that almost sounded sincere. Like what happened to Flossie. Her situation didn't start with insults or threats. It started with a message from a total stranger saying, "I love you, what do I do?" She responded, "Oh my, I'm not sure what can be done about that." Now days passed, and then he came back with, "Marry me, I never asked for anything, please." She simply replied with, "It's okay, how are you anyway?" That was enough to make him start messaging more. He apologized first. "Sorry for the delay, my internet is very bad this time." Then came the real message. "I'm a big fan of you, and recently I am deeply in love with you. I can say I feel great, but at the same time the fact of you being so far hurts me. I really fell in love with you." And he followed it up with this. "Sorry for the terrible English, I'm from Brazil. I'm really studying your language to understand you and be fluent. I know this is very sudden, but if you say that I have any chance, I would be able to cross a continent for you, to show you at least for a moment how much I love you. I hope I have not scared you. I am not a pervert." But Flossie wasn't the only one who had to endure this kind of harassment, just for being part of the community. Jackie Bernal was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Content creator who ran a YouTube channel, first under the name Mecha Jaeyoon from 2013 to 2017, now known as Mary Amney, where she posted videos related to the game. But the more people knew who she was, whether through her videos or at real life events, the more unwanted messages she received. One read like someone shouting through the screen, "Hi, I married you in my dream once. It was the bestest dream ever. One day you're gonna marry me in real life and we're gonna have a bunch of dueling babies." Another message started off sounding like a fan. "Hey Mecha Jaeyoon, wow, I see your videos on YouTube. They're great." But within a few lines it suddenly changed. "And you know what I love? You. I want to be your t-shirt when it's wet. I want to be the shower when you sweat. But more than anything, I swear, I want to be your underwear." Then it turned into something longer. "What I want more than anything is to hold you in my arms and tell you just how much I love you and how much I want you in my life." Before ending with, "I love you, Mecha Jaeyoon, marry me please." Some messages didn't even try to hide their intentions and just skipped straight to their demands. "So I've seen some of your videos online, and I know this is kind of forward and you probably wouldn't do something like this, but you should totally send me a pic of your glorious..." And then 3 months later, the same person came back with just, "Show me them." What made it worse was that it didn't end online. One comment on one of her YouTube videos referenced seeing her at a Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series event and described in graphic detail what they wanted to do to her. "You're so hot. I saw you at YCS Tacoma and I had to go to the bathroom and clean my... I wanted you to choke on my..." Those were only a few of the women mentioned in the House of Champs video, and the issue did not end there. On July 1st, 2018, about 2 years after the video was released, the issue reached a wider audience when YG Organization posted an article about it. Instead of focusing on a single story, the article pulled together multiple accounts that showed how varied and serious these experiences could be. In one case, an unnamed player was suspended after making extreme threats toward a female, and in one detailed interview, a new player explained how what started as a simple question about upcoming cards turned into someone asking her to trade personal photos in exchange for information about cards that had not been officially released yet, even after she tried to explain that she was in a relationship. She received a message from this person that read, "He won't find out, it's only for my eyes." As the article spread, discussions appeared on platforms like Reddit. On April 8, 2022, a post from YGO Anon on X talked about her first local tournament where, after already feeling out of place, she noticed something that made her leave the event entirely. "A woman's first locals. I walked around a bit, getting weird looks. Eventually sat down to see a picture of my underwear on a guy's photo he was showing to friends. Told manager. He didn't care. Left and never went back. Don't tell me misogyny isn't rampant in the community." Then on October 26, 2025, another player under the username MiwaBell1 shared her experience in a thread that showed how these moments can build over time instead of happening all at once. "This isn't meant to generalize men. It's to highlight that Yu-Gi-Oh isn't as innocent of a place as some might think. I was very loudly told at a locals that my boobs distracted my opponents, and that was the only reason they lost. I was wearing a Uniqlo t-shirt. The person sitting next to me at an event touched my inner thigh and played it off as a mistake. A stranger tried to talk to me at an event and wouldn't respect that I was heading to the bathroom. They waited for me outside. We did not have a conversation. There was absolutely no need for them to do that." And then she said something that was hard to read. "I've cried in the bathroom at events because people have made me feel so unsafe and uncomfortable." But despite everything, she said this: "I love Yu-Gi-Oh! I love the game. I love the people that I've met through it. I don't love that some bad eggs have made me feel like I shouldn't go to in-person events. That being said, I'll still go to events, but only if my friends are there. Dealing with this alone is honestly really scary." Now at the same time, Konami had already introduced a code of conduct that clearly stated that these kinds of actions could lead to suspensions or removal from organized play. But that didn't change anything since the problem still persists. And while these experiences happen between players, the next case goes further, because it happened inside a company that was trusted to run the game's official events. Keiichiro Nishira was the CEO and director of liable, one of Japan's largest trading card retail operators, and for years liable operated around 35 stores across Japan, made billions, and helped organize Yu-Gi-Oh events. This was exactly why what happened next caught everyone off guard. Beginning in May of 2019, liable's records showed bulk purchases of rare Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards. On paper, all these transactions looked real and supported by invoices and receipts, but the problem was that no cards were ever purchased or added to the store's inventory. And in April of 2022, liable began an internal investigation, and once the review started, the inconsistencies became difficult to ignore. They found out that behind the scenes, Keiichiro had arranged for liable's fund to be sent to a male accomplice we'll call Taku, and to make it seem as if nothing fishy was going on, Keiichiro used Taku's name to forge a billing statement, and a total of about 180 million yen, or $1.2 million, was transferred from the company to Taku's bank account. Around 95% of it, approximately 160 million yen, or $1 million, returned to Keiichiro's personal account, while the remaining 20 million, or $126,000, was kept by Taku as a fee for his role. Through this process, Keiichiro was able to conceal around 153 million yen, or $965,000, in the business's income, letting liable underpay its corporate taxes by 45 million yen, or $284,000. Now investigators found that at least 100 million yen, or $630,000, had been spent on personal expenses, including luxury hotels, expensive wine, overseas travel with women, high-end vehicles, rent, and entertainment. And with this discovery, Keiichiro was of course dismissed from his position, and all ties with the company were cut. Now by December of 2022, 8 months after the scheme was found out, the Tokyo Regional Taxation Bureau filed criminal charges against Keiichiro and liable for violations of the Corporation Tax Act, Japan's law governing how businesses report and pay taxes. Now nearly a year later, on November 15, 2023, officers from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department arrested Keiichiro at his residence in Koto Ward, Tokyo. This time though, the focus extended beyond tax violations. He was arrested on suspicion of stealing funds from the very business he was supposed to be running, and what began as a series of falsified records had now become a full criminal case. And the same day, liable posted an apology online. "We sincerely apologize for the great concern and inconvenience this has caused to our customers, business partners, and everyone involved. Our company will continue to fully cooperate with the investigation by the Metropolitan Police Department and the Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office. We will continue to further strengthen our internal management system, prevent recurrence, and strive to restore trust." And yet, even with Keiichiro's arrest, the story did not end clearly, because there had been no widely reported sentence. Now Keiichiro hid everything behind paperwork and accounting records, but the next case took that idea even further, and what police found was something that had no business being anywhere near a Yu-Gi-Oh card.
The investigation only deepened their suspicions. The detectives were now 100% certain this street was definitely the source of their little drug problem.
In early August 2022, detectives from the Fairfield City Police, based in Western Sydney, received information about a group that might be selling large amounts of illegal drugs in the area. At that point, they didn't know how big the operation might be, or exactly what was going on, but the tip was credible enough that they opened a full investigation. Their attention kept returning to multiple addresses on Arbutus Street in Canley Heights, a suburban area in Western Sydney that is known for its small businesses and residential apartment blocks. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual to anyone passing by, but as the investigation went deeper, they found out that 5 units inside the same apartment block were involved, and a case that size called for more than one team, so they were joined by officers from the New South Wales Raptor Squad, a group that helps investigate serious criminal networks. Together, they continued working on the case throughout the month. On Tuesday of August 23, 2022, the police then made their move. Officers carried out 5 search warrants at the same time, uncovering approximately $2 million in cash spread across the apartments. But it didn't stop there. As they continued searching the units, they found 4.85 pounds of cocaine and 2.2 pounds of methamphetamine, in addition to other illegal and prescription-only drugs that police did not name, estimated at $800,000. Now, there was more than just drugs and cash. Officers also seized a prohibited weapon and several stolen IDs. But buried among everything, investigators found something that made them question the whole operation. Inside the units were trading cards, with most of them being Yu-Gi-Oh cards and others being Pokemon cards. The whole collection was also estimated to be worth around $50,000. And after the raids, police statements mentioned that officers believed the group had been using the cards as part of a money laundering scheme. During their raid, police arrested 5 people inside the apartments and brought them to Fairfield Police Station. The group included 2 27-year-old men, 1 31-year-old man, and 2 women, aged 26 and 32. None of their names were publicly released though. Between August 23rd and August 24th, 2022, these people were charged, and the cards were seized. They were charged with offenses ranging from drug supply and possession to dealing with proceeds of crime and participating in a criminal group. Now, after initial reports, the story unfortunately faded. There was no trial coverage and no outcome was ever made public. Now, this bust ended with evidence that could be photographed, weighed, and counted. But this next case was different, because the person at the center of it wasn't hiding in an apartment. He was competing at the highest level of the game.
Roy St. Clair, aka, as I call him, cheating ass fat. Yeah, I know I can't be calling him like fat, but it's whatever.
Around 2003, Roy James St. Clair was 16 years old, playing Yu-Gi-Oh out of local card shops in Greenbelt, Maryland. He started learning the game during its early era, when most players were still figuring things out, but Roy didn't stay average for long. Within a year, he'd already outpaced every other player in his local scene. By 2004, at 17 years old, he became the #1 ranked Yu-Gi-Oh player in the United States. That year, he also qualified for the World Championship in Los Angeles and placed in the top 8. And from the outside, it looked like the perfect rise of a prodigy. However, something would happen that completely ruined everything he'd built. During a $10,000 Yu-Gi-Oh event called the Versus TCG tournament in 2004, he found himself deep into the tournament and was making some moves that raised concern among judges. At the start, nothing seemed unusual, as it was common for fellow players to gather around matches to observe while waiting for their own rounds. But Roy wasn't just watching the matches, he was communicating with a nearby player, Alex, through subtle physical cues like head movements and gestures. Now, this situation would escalate when Roy would make a direct verbal comment to another nearby player named Paul that was clearly enough for others to hear.
Alex made a misplay there.
Now, Alex would win his match and secure his place in the tournament, but once the judges started to pay closer attention, Roy's earlier behavior no longer looked incidental. According to Alex's post on a forum site called Pojo, officials stepped in to review what had been going on, and what they found out was that Roy had been signaling with grunts and shaking his head to guide Alex to his match, without his opponent knowing. As a result, Alex's win was overturned. Roy, on the other hand, was disqualified, lost $2,000 in potential prize money, and was given a 90-day suspension that also prevented him from competing at nationals. Despite that, many were surprised to see that didn't slow Roy's career down. In early 2005, a year after he was caught signaling, he returned and reached the quarterfinals of the first Shonen Jump Championship, or SGC Columbus, one of the largest Yu-Gi-Oh tournament series in North America at the time, and made a top 8 finish as well. His results spoke for themselves, but so did the questions about whether those victories were earned fairly. And in 2008, while at a regional tournament in College Park, Maryland, he submitted a standard deck list, like any other match he'd been in. But during a random check, officials discovered that Roy was actually playing a completely different set of cards from the one he'd registered. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, every player is required to submit a list of the exact cards they plan to use before the tournament begins, and switching to a different deck mid-tournament is strictly forbidden. So that means Roy was able to play cards that his opponents had no way of preparing for, since they could only look up the deck he'd officially registered. And once he was caught, Roy was disqualified and given a ban lasting around 3.5 years. And most people assumed that that would be the end of his career, but it wasn't. That same year, the structure behind competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Changed. Upper Deck, the company that had been running organized play in North America and the one that issued the suspension, was no longer in control. Instead, it was handed over to Konami, which meant the game was now under a new system. And with that change came unexpected news that previous bans didn't fully carry over. And this meant that 22-year-old Roy was no longer restricted from competing. And with the freedom to play once again, Roy placed in the top 4 at US Nationals. He would even compete at the World Championship in Tokyo and finish 3rd. Now by 2010, 2 years after suspension was cancelled, Roy had fully re-established himself. This time it was with the X-Sabers deck. This was a strategy built around a group of creatures called monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! That worked together as a team, with each one supporting the others to quickly overwhelm opponents and remove cards they had in hand. And with this, Roy earned multiple high finishes: a 3rd place finish at SJC Nashville, 2nd place at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series or YCS in Toronto, and a top 8 finish at the YCS Philadelphia. Across these events, he remained near the top. However, players would already label him as one of the top cheaters within the community. Now in February 2011, when Roy was 24 now, the tension from his previous cheating incidents surfaced again at YCS Dallas in Texas. Here he finished strong in the top 32 with his X-Sabers deck, but during a routine check deck, the staff noticed something small. There were 3 fossil dino cards that had slightly bent corners. In tournaments, cards must not have any visible marks or damage that can tell them apart from the rest, since that would give the player an unfair advantage. Now the judges initially cleared the cards, saying they were fine. So the tournament continued and Roy's placement stood. It wasn't until after his match that he received the news that he was banned for another 2 years. Konami staff determined that the bent corners were not accidental and that it was done to make them easy for Roy to identify, allowing him to know exactly when they were coming up next. Now knowing his history, everyone expected an apology, or maybe an attempt to distance himself. Instead, he responded with anger though.
But I'm just really sick and tired of Konami trying to be straight up just take great players out of this game.
However, this stance didn't change the ruling, and after finally serving his suspension, Roy returned in 2013 at 26 years old. His first game back was at YCS Austin in February 2013, where he reached the top 16 using a Karakuri deck. Karakuri monsters were machines that automatically shifted position whenever an opponent attacked them, and that shift was what would set off a chain of effects that kept building on each other. On top of that, he paired them with a card called Macrocosmos, which removed every card from the game permanently instead of sending them to the discard pile. This meant that his opponents couldn't get back anything that they'd lost, cutting off the strategies that most players relied on to come back into a game. He would also place in the top 32 at YCS Columbus 2 years later in 2015. And just when it seemed like the full picture of who Roy was might finally come into focus, something happened that made it impossible. On May 16, 2017, 14 years after his humble beginnings in small local card shops, he actually died at the age of 30 due to breathing problems, bringing an abrupt end to a career that had never followed a straight path. Now the response to his death spread across forums like Pojo and Reddit, where long threads began to fill with players sharing memories that stretched back years, and moments where Roy's understanding of the game was unmatched. Those reflections could not be separated from the other side of the story though, as his cheating incidents were also mentioned in the forums, with comments like, "There's literally a cheat in Yu-Gi-Oh! Named after him. He was one of, if not the biggest cheaters in Yu-Gi-Oh! History." It's not true at all. Roy St. Clair had been banned from competitive Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, and Pokemon, and is well documented as one of the biggest cheaters of all time. Roy always cheated in every game he played. I have no respect for that dude. While Roy's story was one that the community had years to argue about and eventually mourn, this next case gave no one that kind of time, because somewhere in Tokyo, someone had just walked into a card shop and was about to do the unthinkable.
He said he was debating whether to purchase the card because it was so expensive and stayed in the store for about 50 minutes before he darted out of the store.
On March 13, 2024, at around 4:50 in the afternoon, inside the Fuku Collection Card Specialty Shop in Akihabara, Tokyo, 22-year-old Sora Takashina stepped inside. He had no stable place to stay and no job, and was doing whatever he could to just get by. In the store, he looked like any other customer though, who was focused on the display cases. But he wasn't there to browse, he had something else in mind. One thing in the shop was worth more than anything else for sale. This item was a Blue Eyes White Dragon card that was displayed behind glass, positioned carefully under lighting, and valued at approximately 4.98 million yen, or $33,500. This was the card serious collectors traveled to see, and that made it a centerpiece of the shop's reputation. Now Sora walked to the counter and asked to see it up close. In a shop like this, it was standard for buyers to inspect before committing at this price point, so the clerk followed the procedure. He unlocked the case, removed the card, and held it out within Sora's reach. Now Sora looked at the card inches from his hand and made it move. Within seconds, the clerk felt the weight of the card in his hand go away and only saw Sora, who bolted through the store and onto the street. Outside, about 330 feet away from the shop, there was a car waiting. Inside was 22-year-old Kanta Samni, who was already behind the wheel. For a moment, the clerk just stood there, staring at where the card had been, and once the shock cleared, he reported the incident, and officers from the Tokyo Manseibashi police station started the investigation. Sora and Kanta then moved to another location within a few hours, as they knew that the police would already be looking for them. And later, roughly 3 hours after the theft at around 8 PM, they arrived at a card resale shop in Keibukuro, where they would sell the same Blue Eyes White Dragon card for 1 million yen, or about $6,400, a fraction of what it was actually worth. But what they weren't aware of at the time was that this action would create a clear trail for investigators. So for the next few days, police used security footage from the store and the sale in Keibukuro to find and locate both of them. And on March 22nd, 2024, 9 days after the theft, Sora and Kanta were arrested on suspicion of theft. During the interrogation, Sora admitted, "I did it to have the money for living and entertainment expenses." While Kanta said, "I didn't think that Takashina had stolen anything." As for the card, it was eventually recovered after the police contacted the shop in Keibukuro. This next case had nothing to do with the store. Instead, it ended in a driveway in the dark, with someone who never saw it coming.
This level of crime is absolutely rare. It's the first time that I've ever heard of it happening in this area.
On the evening of June 9, 2016, 24-year-old David Bologna attended a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament at a local card and gaming shop called Fantasy Games in Roseland, Indiana. He'd spent the last 2 years building his collection across 4 binders that had nearly $10,000 worth of cards. It was something he'd put everything into, and that night he had no reason to think twice about bringing it along. Around him were other players, some familiar, some less so, but all part of the same local scene that he'd been in for years. When the tournament ended, David picked up his things and left the store. By around 11 PM, he'd made it back to his home in Mishawaka, Indiana. He pulled into his driveway and sat in his car a moment before heading inside. But then out of nowhere, he heard several footsteps outside of the car. And he'd later recount, "I heard many footsteps run up to my vehicle and turned and looked, and 2 people with shirts over their faces with bricks in their hands just started wailing on me on the driver's side." 4 men had surrounded the car, and the first strike came while he was still in his seat, trapped with nowhere to go and no time to react. Again and again, bricks came down on him as he tried to shield himself. He could feel the swelling spread across his face, and while he was pinned down and unable to fight back, they reached in and grabbed all 4 binders. In the middle of it, he caught a glimpse of their faces and recognized them. "They know me from the tournaments for about a year, I would say. They know what I have, and they know what kind of collector I am." David was left injured in his own driveway, dealing with both physical pain and the shock of what just happened. His 4 binders were gone, and so were the 2 years he spent filling them. Now shortly after, he reported the incident to the Mishawaka Police Department and provided as many details as he could. And the investigation led police back to Fantasy Games, where owner Mark Krakow provided surveillance footage from that evening. And on June 13, 2016, just 4 days after the attack, ABC 57, a local news channel, covered the case.
Well, Brian, his face is pretty bruised up, and he spent most of the day at the doctor's, but he's a serious collector. So even after being beat up, he gave police this 10-page document detailing all of the cards that were stolen from him, and he says that the value that they were worth and the injuries that he has now, this was a serious crime.
And I just recently have kind of had the ability to start thinking about starting a legitimate business with it. But now I really have to rethink everything.
The local community also responded in its own way. Staff at a card shop in Elkhart, Indiana, organized a GoFundMe campaign to help David recover from the loss of his collection and help with his medical bills. But the investigation stalled for reasons unknown, and 9 years later, the case remained unresolved. The cards never came back, and neither did the people who took them. However, for this next case, the players' community couldn't say the same, because for years, they weren't sure if he was the victim or the problem.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Thanks, Judge. You're a real help, by the way. If it was anybody else, literally, that would have not had fun.
Peter Cheng was a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh player from New Jersey who'd built his reputation long before most players outside his area even knew his name. In the late 2000s, he won local and regional tournaments consistently. At first, it looked like the rise of a highly skilled player who understood the game at a deeper level than most. But the more he won, the more people started paying attention. Players who faced him began noticing things that didn't add up. There would be times when his opponents would draw poorly after he shuffled their decks, and instances where his own cards seemed unusually strong. Because of that, some players believed that he was manipulating decks during shuffling, while others suspected that he was using marked cards that allowed him to know which card was next. However, nobody had proof. But in local card stores across Connecticut, he was removed from multiple events and eventually banned from several locations for having marked cards. Despite this, there was no formal punishment from organized play at higher playing levels. This meant that he was still free to compete nationally, and that was exactly what Peter did. Around 2009, he began traveling across the country to compete in major events. Instead of struggling to keep up, he kept winning, even defeating well-known players like Adam Korn and Jeff Jones. In November at SJC Edison, he reached the top 16, but lost to Kevin Slapnick. He also achieved a top 4 finish at SJC Orlando and a top 16 finish at Columbus, and to many, this confirmed that Peter was one of the strongest players in the game, but it raised more questions for others who already knew about the previous accusations against him. During the 2010 SJC Los Angeles, Peter started with an impressive 8-win and 2-loss record that put him in the position to reach the top, but he was suddenly disqualified mid-round, not for cheating, but for lying to a judge, though no one knows exactly what he lied about. Then on May 16, 2010, at the YCS in Washington DC, Peter reached the finals once again. His opponent was Stephen Harris, a strong player using cards that many considered more powerful than Peter's strategy, and because of the concerns surrounding him, the match was watched very closely by 7 judges from multiple angles. Everything he did was under close watch, and despite all of that, he won. The victory shocked many in the community. This was because his deck wasn't considered the strongest in the game and relied on specific combinations that were hard to pull off consistently. Yet he still managed to defeat top players and secured the championship. It looked like every accusation had been wrong and that Peter was just that good. Now 2 months later, during check-in for the national championship in July of 2010, a judge approached him to talk, and after a long conversation, Peter was banned from organized play for 5 years, effective immediately. This decision was based on his history of disqualifications and incidents that happened over the years. But then in 2015, his ban was lifted and Peter was back. His arrival wouldn't be as easy though, as there were new decks, new strategies, and new players that had already taken over the scene. And with that, he began competing using a Stellar Knight deck, a strategy where one card called Stellar Knight Deneb would allow him to search through his deck and pull out any other Stellar Knight he wanted. This was the same mechanic he'd been accused of abusing before, and that raised concerns. But despite that, he placed in the top 32 at the national championship. And on August 22nd to 23rd, 2015, he won the UDS or Ultimate Duelist Series Philadelphia event, defeating Sean McCabe in the finals. Once again, he was at the top. Now in 2016, he continued competing, placing in the top 16 at the YCS Origins and the top 32 at the YCS Providence. He also participated in the UDS Winter Invitational event in Los Angeles, where he faced players like Michael Saxon. But by 2017, he was once again removed from official organized play for reasons that were never revealed. So he shifted to competing in independent events that were operated outside of Konami's authority. At the ARG Circuit Series Springfield tournament that year, during round 5, Peter faced Fraser Smith, a former YCS champion. To most people in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, this was still the match they know him for, as it was streamed live to thousands of viewers online, and within minutes of the match, this would start to unfold in a way that no one watching could ignore. To understand what happened, there's one basic rule to know. In Yu-Gi-Oh, some cards get permanently removed from the game when used, while others go to a discard pile that players can pull from later. These were 2 different outcomes, and mixing them up can completely change the game in your favor. At the start of game 1, Peter won the dice roll and chose to go first, which was widely considered an advantage. He began activating a card called Left Arm Offering that required him to permanently remove his entire hand from the game in exchange for searching his deck for a powerful card. Now instead of doing that, he sent his hand to the discard pile, which meant that those cards could potentially be used later again. Now at the table, this had gone unnoticed, but online, viewers began reacting almost instantly. From there, he was able to bring back a powerful monster, using cards that were only accessible because of the rule violation that happened earlier. Now Fraser must have not noticed this, as he took his turn and attempted to respond, but Peter quickly countered and shut down his play, and it looked like he'd gotten away with it. But at that point, a head judge stepped in, and his decision to intervene did not come from the table itself, but from the online audience. By the time the judge reviewed the situation, too much had already happened, and neither player could recall the game's original state, so correcting the mistake was impossible. After discussing the situation, it was ruled as a procedural error, and a warning was issued to Fraser for not catching it, and Peter received a game loss. Even then, the penalty was considered minimal, since there was no clear proof that he'd done it on purpose. He disagreed with how this was handled, and argued that the mistake should have been caught earlier, before the game progressed to that point. But the decision stood, and he was now down 1 game in a best-of-3 match, meaning the first player to score 2 games would be the winner of the match. Now as the match moved into game 2, the online audience was watching every card Peter played. He He went first and began placing cards on the table and combining them to build a stronger position. But as the sequence continued, small problems started appearing again. At one point, he'd used a card's effect that had a cost attached to it, but he never actually paid it. He went ahead and searched his deck anyway using the same card, and was able to get one that shouldn't have been accessible at that moment. And shortly after, he attempted to activate another one that required a certain number of cards in his discard pile, but the numbers didn't actually match what was actually there. Now after a while, Peter realized something was off. He paused and questioned his own actions, trying to work through what had gone wrong while still continuing to play.
This is like a blah blah blah.
Wrong.
Okay, I honestly don't know.
He had filled his side of the table with so many cards that Frazier had almost nothing he could do to fight against him. He had no clear way to respond, and while most players would have surrendered, the match did not end there, because as Frazier seemed ready to give up, a judge stepped in again, and this time the problem was bigger than a procedural error. The judge had spotted that after activating a specific card earlier, Peter should have been restricted from placing certain cards on the table for the rest of his turn. However, he'd continued putting more of them anyway, and built a position that should have been impossible.
Oh, I guess it was that. You probably were supposed to detach for that.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's like wait, something happened. That's why.
Something went wrong.
Yes. So do I even still need to do this first? Because I was originally gonna do that.
Oh god, I don't want to play anymore.
Everything he'd placed was against the rules.
Oh my god.
This is the most.
You went from a game 1, game lost to.
Oh my god.
And then.
And with that, the match came to an end. Frazier Smith was declared the winner as he took the match 2-0, despite having played only a handful of cards across both games. And for viewers, this result was hard to process. After the match, Peter defended himself by saying that he'd only recently picked up the deck, was unfamiliar with how it worked, and claimed someone else had built the deck for him. Now the head judge concluded that he did not believe Peter's actions were intentional, and that they were seen as just mistakes. Because of this, he was only given a match loss, and not a disqualification, and this would allow him to continue in the tournament.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Thanks, Judge. You're a real help, by the way. If it was anybody else, literally, that would have not had slide.
A Reddit user named Chaos Galantman even posted the full footage on r/Yu-Gi-Oh! Entitled it 30 Minutes of Community Gold, Frazier Smith vs Cheater Peg, ARG Springfield Round 5. And so whatever reputation Peter had left was gone. Everyone expected Peter to take a step back after everything that had happened. But 1 week later, after his official suspension from Konami had been lifted, he showed up at YCS Seattle. And in that event, he was disqualified yet again and received another ban that finally brought an end to his competitive career. He stepped away from high-level play completely and started running an online store on TCG Player under the name Lumina. Now over time, the competitive scene moved on with new players, but his name never stopped being controversial in Yu-Gi-Oh! Circles. Looking back at everything, the same question still lingers. 7 judges watched his 2010 Washington DC Championship match from every angle, and Peter won clearly by every account that day. But how many of his other wins across all those years were earned without cheating?